The Hellenization of the non-Greek world in the Near East is going to have profound changes culturally and politically within these areas. Most of the people in these lands came from older civilizations, Egyptians, Persians, Jews, for example. But the rulers, from the king on down, they were all Greeks and Macedonians. The governments were made up of foreigners. Non-Greek natives could only be get into government service only by becoming Greeks. They had to give up their previous way of life, their ways of thinking, their ways of dress, their ways of speaking. They had to all become Greek. In society, its rulers and the upper class determine what kind of art and literature is produced and what kind of intellectual activity goes on. Since the Hellenistic rulers were Greek, Hellenistic civilization, even in the Near East, rapidly became Greek. This was possible because most of the intellectuals in the Hellenistic world were professional scholars and teachers. Before this, in the 400s, Greek authors and philosophers did other things for a living. For example, Aeschylus and Euripides were both wealthy landowners, and Socrates himself was a stonemason. This began to change with the sophists, who taught rhetoric for money. For example, Aristotle in the 300s was the teacher of Alexander the Great. In the Hellenistic period, professionals, scholars, and thinkers moved to wherever there was demand for work. Many of these were attracted to the new Macedonian kingdoms of the Near East. Hellenistic rulers founded a lot of new cities in the Near East and encouraged Greeks to migrate to them. The most famous example is going to be Alexandria in Egypt. But there are plenty more. In these cities, the kings established Greek schools to educate the children of Greek immigrants and to also teach Greek culture to non-Greek subjects. The kings were willing to pay writers and the philosophers to come to their cities to teach, write, and do research. Since they had lots of money, they could attract the greatest scholars. These great schools were therefore main centers of intellectual activity in Hellenistic times, and they had great influence on what they could be like. Thus, it's necessary to understand what the schools taught. There were two types of education. The most popular is going to be schools of rhetoric or speech making. They were designed to teach people how to become political leaders, which is what everybody wanted to be. Every large school had one, and they were run by the sophists. Their goals and methods were primarily developed by an Athenian sophist named Isocrates. Now, he believed that they were learning how to speak and to write intelligently was not necessary just for politicians, but it was useful for other people of other works of life. He also believed that good public speakers had to know a lot about other things besides rhetoric. His students were required to study literature, mathematics, science, history, philosophy, and this is what we would call the liberal arts. The second major type of education was in philosophy. Philosophy included the study of all major intellectual subjects, literature, natural science, social science, as well as what we would consider philosophy. Philosophical schools were mainly for the professional intellectual. The first school had been founded in Athens by Plato and Aristotle, but many others were established in the Near East by various Hellenistic kings. The most famous example was set up by Ptolemy in Egypt and Alexandria. It was dedicated to the Muses, the goddesses of learning. Thus it was called the Museum. And the Museum was based on the ideas of Aristotle. In addition to teaching, the scholars at the museum spent a lot of time collecting, observing, and interpreting information, chiefly about literature and about the natural phenomenon. To assist them, Ptolemy built the largest library in the world at that time. Later, kings would collect specimens of strange plants and animals and built laboratories to examine them in. With its large facilities and emphasis on research, the museum was more like a modern university than any other institution in the ancient world.